Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, everybody. It's a special edition. Today, my guest is one of the most prodigious drummers in modern music for over the last 40 years. He was the backbone of all the early 70s breakbeat albums that still resonate today. He's played with the skipper Henry Franklin, Hampton Hawes, Michael Howell, Patrice Rushen, and George Duke, Benny Maupin, the Crusaders. He's been a leader on several albums of his own. He's steeped in arranging, production, composition. He's currently a drumming instructor at the University of Southern California. And I mean, we could go on and on and on, but I'd rather have the man tell it himself. Ndugu, Chancler, welcome to the Jake Feinberg program.
Thank you, Jake. I'm glad to be here.
It's been a long time coming. I wanted to ask you, first off, what are you doing these days when a young drumming student comes to you? How do you get them to, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to listen to any old players? Do you want them to just come up with their own? How do you get them to create their own sound?
Well, the first thing about your own sound is you have to create sound. So when I'm teaching a new student, the first thing is I teach them is how to get the sound that they're hearing in their head. And once they get that, then we can go on to getting to your own sound. Getting to your own sound is based on you having a goal in mind, an objective. And that objective is based on what you hear in your head. Music goes on in your mind, in your heart, in your soul. So whenever I'm dealing with a new student, I want them to start to hear music internally.
When you were growing, well, first of all, you grew up, you were born in Louisiana, but you moved to Southern California, is that right?
Yeah, I moved to Southern California and started playing in Southern California.
Well, I have to ask you, Ndugu, I wanted to find out a little bit about your folks, too. How did they come to the United States?
They were born here. They were, slave descendants. Louisiana, French, my father's that Louisiana French Creole thing, and my mother was, the daughter of a sharecropper and all that.
And
they were here.
But they gave you they gave you an African name though, Ndugu. What does that mean?
It means brother or kinsman in Swahili or Zulu.
Wow, and you. Now, were you given any other? Did you ever at any time want a more American name, or that was some? That was a.
My first name is Leon.
Oh, that's right.
My middle name is Ndugu, and my last name is Louisiana French, Chancler.
I have to tell you, I know you as Ndugu because there are albums that you're on where all it says is Ndugu.
Right.
And I love that because they're basically saying my brother was on here.
Yeah.
But there was when you first started when you came to Los Angeles and you started drumming, what was the sound that was going? What was the sound that was in your soul? What were you hearing?
I was hearing everything because in those days, radio was all inclusive. You heard Motown, you heard Jimi Hendrix, you heard Sammy Davis Jr., you heard Cannonball Adderley, Horace Silver, you heard all of that on the radio, James Brown, all of that simultaneously. So there wasn't a line of division of jazz, rock, funk, whatever. It was just all good music, all lumped together. So when I started playing, you just absorbed everything because the hip guys were into Motown as much as they were into jazz.
And you came. Motown made a shift from Detroit to Southern California as well. I think it changed the music scene out there as well.
Well, it opened up the door for more African Americans to be in the recording studio. That it did do, being one of the more workable accounts for the music. But Motown was just one of the things that created, an outlet here. There were a lot of records made here because this was the hub of recording for a lot of bands, a lot of film music, things like that. So
When you first got there, who were some of the first cats that you bumped into and decided to play with?
To play with or to be inspired by? Which one?
Yeah, let's go with inspiration first.
Inspiration, there were guys here like Earl Palmer and Stix Hooper, Paul Humphrey, Panama Francis was here for a little bit, Shelly Mann. All those guys were the guys here that were doing it. So those were like the early Los Angeles inspirations. And then, all of the later guys that became my peer group, the James Gadsons and Harvey Masons, the likes of those guys, we kind of all grew into this whole thing together.
When you got out there, you actually you were never formally trained yourself, though. You just learned through playing.
No. I went to school.
Talk a little bit about how you went. What was that experience like in school? What you took away most from the education, and if
I was a music ed major in college. I was a music ed major at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and what I took away most was that most schools were a little behind as it applied to jazz education. You got music education, but not a strong jazz education. So I found that what I had learned in high school really made it easy for me to go through college, because I had studied not only traditional theory and harmony, I had studied jazz theory and harmony, and that made it easy for me to get through college.
Yeah, there's something to be said for those high school band teachers. They're pretty much unsung heroes.
Exactly. So I had a strong enough foundation early on that set me up for college, where I understood what was going on in college.
You were actually probably ahead of the curve. You when you got there, who else was out there at the time that you collaborated with early on? Was the skipper out there with you?
Yeah, those guys were out here, but my main collaborator was like Patrice Rushen, because we were old schoolmates. There was a group of us that was a peer group in school, and that would be Patrice Rushen, Larry Nash. I'm trying to think of some of the bass players. Jimmy Nash, Sherman McKinney was one of the bass players. Then later, Gerald Albright, and who else? Raymond Pounds was one of the other drummers. There were a lot of us that came out of the school band that had a strong connection with each other, even through college and so forth. So that was my main peer group, and that's who I started to work with and started to play around with. The guys like Henry Franklin and all that came from me working with some of the older guys like Harold Land, who was like a mentor to me. Gerald Wilson, who hired me right out of high school. Those two guys were like great teachers for me, because I got a chance to play and learn at the foot of the masters, and those were those guys.
I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because in some ways, do you feel that you would like to be a mentor to young, or do you feel like you serve that role today the way Oliver Nelson and the other guys sort of took you under their wing? And if so, how do you do it?
Go ahead.
No, well, you know what it is, Ndugu, is that I would like you to talk about how you do it, because I would assume it's different because our society, and most importantly, music has changed a lot.
Music has changed, but the concept of mentoring and influencing hasn't. So, I'll find a student that has an interest in playing the music, and I will spend time with them. I will expose them to things. I will give them guidance. I'll give them advice. I'll give them listening tools. Sometimes I even feed them and give them equipment. Mentoring goes a long ways, because a lot of times, a lot of these students don't have the same opportunities. They have the heart, but not the opportunity. So mentoring just deals with helping them find that path, getting on that path, and staying on that path. So I spend a lot of time with young musicians trying to help them out.
Yeah, I was in Philadelphia interviewing. I went to Mickey Roker's house and sat down and talked to him for a while. And he talked about giving away ride cymbals to numerous young cats who just want to play. And I think you're right. I think they don't have the means, they don't have the economic means to get the equipment. And sometimes if it means putting some drums in front of them is just as important as telling them about technique.
That's right. Mentoring goes beyond the music. I mean, because you got to teach them to be gentlemen or ladies. You got to teach them to absorb, and then you got to teach them to give and give back.
Is it something that I think our society, in some ways, is lacking in that compassion and love, and I see that. I see that, and I hear that in the music from the time period that I care deeply about. I see, in many ways, a society now that is less inclined to extend the helping hand, to reach out. And I was just curious as to not so much yourself, but how you view society in general now. As far as are we more generous or are we more insecure?
You know what? I mean, the heart of people doesn't change overall. Those that are giving, give under whatever circumstances. Givers give freely and from the heart, no matter what the climate of the giving is. Those that are skeptical about giving, they give with reservation anyway. So I think what happens in a lot of cases is those that have that mentoring heart, that mentoring spirit, they do it anyway regardless.
Yeah, I mean, that was beautifully said. I look at you in your youth. When Oliver Nelson took you aboard, was that in a big band setting?
No, it was actually a quintet.
Who was in that band?
Bobby Bryant. I know Bobby Bryant. I can't remember the piano player. It could have been Mike Wofford, and I don't remember the bass player, who could have been Gene Chirico, but I'm not sure. I got to go back to some of my old tapes and dig that up and see what that was.
Yeah, you don't worry. We're going to be doing some. I got some old vinyl here that I want to put your ear to and see if you can remember it. When you think back to that time, and just to get a time reference, we're talking about the mid '60s.
Late '60s.
The late '60s.
7 through 70, 71, 72.
Were you? How would you describe? Why was there such an openness and especially from the black community, being black, to have pride in being a black person, to love but also be self-respected after years of outright racism and bigotry and hatred? There was this youth movement going on, and you were part of it, and that showed up in the music, in the wardrobes, in the camaraderie, in the love, and the accessibility. And I couldn't think of anyone better to try to articulate the essence of that time period for about being a black man at that time in America.
Well, one thing about that was after the riots, number one. Number two, it was also at a time when black pride was part of what was going on. Because during that time, black pride was when all the movements were starting to come about. So you had all of this pride. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. You had all of this, the whole thing of being who you are and being free in the music. You also had the music changing. You know, you had fusion coming into play. You know, so all of that was happening. So all that was going on. So that's what happened.
But when you say, when you say I'm black and I'm proud, wasn't it though the implementation of showing what that was about that was the special part of it? You were expressing it through love, through music, and
I mean, a lot of other people were expressing it in other ways. You know, that was a period where creatively things moved to some different heights, because it not only was changing musically, it was also changing just from, poetically, from spirituality, all of those things, politically, economically, everything was changing during that time. So it was a whole movement. It wasn't just the music. It was a whole cultural movement. The late 60s and 70s. That was a whole cultural movement.
It certainly bred some pretty intense players. Just going back through that. But when you were, if you can remember back, where was your first professional gig? Like what venue was it at?
Well, I think I don't know the exact first professional, but I know one of the more monumental ones was Shelley's Manhole with Gerald Wilson's big band. But when you say professional, what does that really mean?
It means you get paid. It means you get paid.
Professional. Some people say your first professional gig is the one when you got paid. But other people say when you're on a stage or a venue of note. So it varies in concept what you would really consider to be a professional gig. You know what I mean?
I totally know, and it's funny because I in talking to a couple of guys, I used the word jamming, and they said, do you know what jamming really means? Jamming means playing for free. I don't play for free, so you get there's this sort of there's a monetary component to it, and there's also the like you said, the part where where does art and money cross over the lines when whether you're on the stage with someone and playing with titans of jazz, whether it's your peers or older people, and then subsequent to that the money component of it. It's a fine line there, but I can see the dichotomy without a doubt.
Right.
You consider
so that in itself varies. Professional starts off as a state of mind. You have to first develop a professional state of mind. If you're doing this and you're serious about it, if you're doing this and you're doing this as a job or profession, as opposed to, well, I'm just out here having fun, then that professional attitude takes on a whole different air than the person that just does this on the weekends to have fun.
How did you develop that professionalism? I think that's a really important point you just made. Can you articulate a little bit more about that?
Well, this was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a musician because I wanted to express myself. I wanted to enjoy the joy and pleasures of playing music, but I wanted not to shortchange myself or the people that I would play with and give them my best, to do my best and to become a great musician. And that was the foundation of becoming professional. I wanted to be serious enough about this for it to become my vocation.
Without losing, or I guess when it's without losing the fun part of it or the love of it. You didn't
that love should be in any job that you do. You need to find the love. Otherwise, you're not going to do a great job. You're going to do an okay job, You're not going to do a great job, and you're not probably going to contribute anything.
So you feel like what other things, I guess, what are the things that you don't love in life? That would be my question for you. Like, what are the things that because I think a majority of American people in Ndugu are doing jobs that they don't love. And it definitely...
Well, that's because they were never afforded to follow their dream. You see, it's a whole nother art to pursuing your dream to the fullest. That takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of dedication. That takes a lot of sacrifice. Because above and beyond what everyone else tells you, your dream starts off being your dream and ends as your dream. That's the first part of that. So with that in mind, everyone, for whatever need or necessity, sometimes has to abandon that for reasons of survival, for reasons of locale, for other reasons stemming from their life, where it be responsibility, where it be lack of survival, lack of sustaining, any of those things. So all of those things are reasons a lot of people don't pursue their dream, and then a lot of people don't have the stick-to-itiveness or the belief and faith in themselves to pursue it. They look at the dream as just a dream that could never become reality. Some of them are fed misinformation about it being a reality, and others aren't.
When you say misinformation, people try to put doubts in their heads?
Yeah, people say, oh, you can't do that. Why would you do that and you can do this? It makes more money, or anything like that. Again, if you're following your dream, you're following your dream. And that has nothing to do with what everyone else feeds you about what your dream is, how to follow it, or anything else. Because that yearning and urge inside for you to follow your dream starts with you. It ends with you. The success of you following your dream is on you.
Was there ever a point in your life when maybe, whether it was marriage or family or, whatever it was, what was the biggest obstacle in your early years that where you came to that crossroads and you said, no, I have the God-given ability and I have the belief in myself, so I'm going to go for it.
Crossroad is relationships and family. That's a major hurdle in an artist following their dream. How do you balance having a family and going out there playing the music and being dedicated to playing the music? Well, it's easier when you can sustain yourself and sustain and help your environment, and your environment being your family. If you can have a family and work and do music, then it's an unselfish approach to being a family person. But if you can't, then on both sides, you're selfishly shortchanging one side or the other.
How did you balance it? How did you make it so that, or did you, obviously you hear about relationships that fell apart just because, the musician was on the road a lot of the time or whatnot. But
the first thing is you have to have people around you that believe in you and your vision and your dream. And if those people don't believe in your vision or your dream, they're going to be draining you anyway.
Uh-huh.
And in that drain, that's going to take a lot away from you, but it's also going to take a lot away from your relationship. And at some point, something has to give. But there has to be a certain amount of faith and belief in the person from the beginning. So in my early years, I had to make sure that whomever I was dealing with understood my plight as an artist, but also understood my goals as an artist, and also my responsibilities being an artist to my family.
and your family, but your family believed in you though.
Some of them did, some of them didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You always pull from positive. And if you always pull from positive, the negative will never have a chance to really just fester and grow enough for you to have any doubt. You know, the first thing that hampers you from really pursuing what you really believe in is the doubt that it may not work. Well, you'll never know if it works until you try it. If you never try it, you never know. And there's so many people that say, man, if only I had stuck to playing music, I would be blah, 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 I could do blah, 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 or whatever. But how can you do that if you doubting who you are and what you do in the first place?
I'm really starting to like the Ndugu Leon Chancler right now. This is the kind of. I just hope that you're getting this into the ears of as many people as possible, whether it's your faculty, your family. I totally am with you because in so many ways, Ndugu, I'm on the same. I mean, there's nobody outrightly not rooting for me. I'd say there are more people in my life that are dear to me, my family, that they're more worried that I'm going to somehow slip and fall and get hurt. They don't want to see me fail, Failure's a big deal in our society now.
That's part of it. Well, but what is failure? Failure is based on someone else's concept of you not succeeding. What is the first motto you were taught? If and when you don't succeed, try and try until you do. So, if you try something one time and it doesn't happen, you got a lot of people saying, see, I told you it wasn't going to work.
Right.
But the timing might have been wrong. You might have came in the wrong door. So you have to exercise the faith that if you believe in it, it will happen. But you got to believe in it in its totality. And you can't give up because you were bumped and bruised. I tell all of my students, there will be 1,000 no's, but it's that one positive yes that will be life-changing and put you in a whole nother perspective.
And who was the first yes for you? Was it Oliver?
No, the first yes for me was me.
I love that. I
had to say, hey man, I can do this. And it was from there that it started to happen. It wasn't based on someone else telling me, hey man, you can do this. It was based on me believing that I could do that. And after that point, now, look, when you start winning, everybody wants to be a part of it.
Yeah, right.
You follow me?
Oh yeah,
so
they want.
If that be the case, don't expect anyone to jump on the bandwagon until you already proven that this works.
Yeah, they all want to jump on that bandwagon though.
Yeah, see, I told you he was going to be something, but those are the same people in the beginning say, oh, you'll never do that. You can't do that. So you're out of your mind. And then all of a sudden, it starts happening. And then they say, oh, I knew he was going to do that. I knew it was just a matter of time. They very seldom say, I didn't believe he could do it. He proved me wrong, and he was great. My own father had that attitude. He never thought that I was going to do this. Never thought that I would make it. He always thought I was going to be making the wrong turn, right? But that was the drive and the motivation that made me go the right way and do all of the right things.
You almost needed that sort of adversary. You need the adversary to.
Some people thrive on that,
right?
And other people buy into it.
That is a great call. Either you use it as a tool for your success, or you crumble and you cave into their tactics.
Exactly.
Beautifully broken down. We're talking to Ndugu Chancler, currently a drumming teacher, instructor, and motivator at the University of Southern California. And Ndugu, I wanted to just take a music interlude here and see if you can go back in time and think about this session. Enjoy it. It's one of my favorites, and it's just a few minutes long. So we'll just sit back and take a listen if that's all right.
Okay.
Ndugu, you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I tell you, it's like every time it's like a driving locomotive engine for me. I mean, that was intense.
Now, is that Michael Howe?
Exactly.
Now, I don't know how I remembered that.
Well, you probably remembered it because of the guitar, right? I mean, that was. I mean, he was the soloist.
Yeah.
But do you remember? You remember the session at all, or does that?
I think that was a black jazz session. I don't think that was fantasy. I think that was. But I might be wrong.
Yeah, you trust. No, trust. Listen, you have nagging doubt.
Yeah.
It was.
Say that again?
It was. I was gonna say, trust your gut. You know, it was not black jazz. It was milestone.
And Yeah, that's fantasy.
That's fantasy, and
yeah.
it was In the Silence, a track called it was called The Call.
Yeah, you know what? Orrin Keep News brought me to Michael Howell, and the way he did it, he said, I got this young guitar player that you'd be good to play with, and he came up with Michael Howell, and we went in and did that session, and he put the guys together, and that's how that happened.
How did he know that? How did he know that you would work well with him?
I guess he just, kind of felt, Orrin and I, first of all, were great friends and great musical adversaries. We kind of shared a lot of the same kind of vibes for music, and he kind of knew what the air and the feel was that I was always hearing, and he always honored that. And this was one of those times. Orrin kind of said, "Okay, I'm going to try this combination." And usually, what Orrin picked up and tried, it worked.
Yeah, when Henry Franklin said that one of the things about Orrin Keep News was that he would come into a session and say, "You guys got it. We're not here to make a hit. We're not here to do anything like that. You guys are the professionals, and you guys just go to work." And I feel, I'm not tapped into mainstream music industry today, but I think that there are a lot of people now that probably are saying a little too much and probably should get out of the way of the musicians once in a while.
Yeah, I agree. It happens all the time. And Orrin was always about the music. Orrin wasn't about, okay, we're doing this to create a hit, blah blah blah. Orrin was always about the music first, and then if any kind of hit aspect came, it came as a result of that.
Like you said before, if you don't love what you do, you're going to do a very average job. But if you just are in a relaxed setting where there's just free flowing, then more likely than not, you're going to produce something amazingly special.
Right.
At least
that's where Orrin was.
When you look back at that time, when you did all that stuff for Prestige and Milestone, it just seemed to me like it was. Carl Burnett said that in a lot of ways the early 70s were kind of the end of music as a cultural foundation.
Well, I won't say that. I'll say that that was the formidable time for the fusion. I hate that term.
Yeah.
But that's what they call that era of jazz, and I call that the lost era of jazz because much as people want to say there is a real link to the past, the present, and the future in fusion music because fusion music bridged the rhythms of the world, the technology of the world, and all of the musical concepts that had already been laid down in the world. And most critics, most jazz aficionados didn't pick up on all of those elements which were the foundations for the future of jazz. But also the futures of a lot of other forms of music as well. You got to understand that it was inside all of that other forms of, especially American music, grabbed a hold of a lot of the trends and tradition that were being established through the technology of the music. The jazz musicians were the first to experiment with all of this technology inside the music and push the envelope to see what the boundaries were and what the limitations were. And because most jazz people wanted to keep jazz in a contained, smaller context, and jazz was ever growing, it got out of hand for them.
It got out of hand, and then I'm going to take you back to something you said earlier about how when you moved to Los Angeles, the diversity of the music on the radio stations was just paramount. You could hear soul, folk, jazz, rock. I mean, and there were stations that prided themselves on that diversity. But wasn't there also a shift in the radio media, especially going to FM radio and
radio started becoming departmentalized, and they started naming directions of music, naming directions in jazz, naming directions in all of the different styles of music, which now channeled the listener to think that if it didn't fall under this umbrella or this umbrella or that umbrella, it wasn't that. And at that point, jazz had already grown to be so many different things that you couldn't just capsulize it and say it was A, B, C, or D. It was all of the above.
Who was responsible? Where was the fundamental shift in the business of music that went from being? I mean, why wasn't it obvious that jazz was at that time expanding and you couldn't even stop it, and yet immediately was reined in? It was reined in and taken away and stripped away, and you had this, whatever you want to call it, fusion came about. The word, I mean, it started with linguistics. Didn't it start with language in order to compartmentalize people themselves?
No, it started with the music. They started compartmentalizing the music. You had what were called, we are a traditional jazz station. We only play A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, if that's all you play, then what is to say that this is or isn't jazz? Because you recognize that you don't want to play it. You follow me? You know, at that point, you know, people saying, well, this artist or that artist, they have gone so far away from jazz, we don't know. Really? Well, how far did they go away from jazz? I mean, you know, my biggest beef with that is Miles Davis was always Miles Davis. Now, might not have been the Miles Davis that you grew up on, might not have been the Miles Davis that you liked, but he was always Miles Davis, a jazz musician. Yes, the setting changed, the instrumentation changed. He was still playing like Miles.
People couldn't kind of adjust to I sort of, when I approach people now, I ask them, if I haven't seen them in a few weeks, I say, how have you evolved in the last few weeks? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of it's you have to keep growing, and yet for some reason it was more about saying, well, we only are going to do stuff, you know, from that's going to sound just like this. We're not going to keep growing and metastasizing and seeing where it's going to be, where the magic can happen through the growth. I think that is the unfortunately we became much more rigid, and as a result, sort of, now as a result, you guide, human beings can be shepherded and guided, and now they're guided to a station like Pandora, where if you listen to, well, I don't know, maybe that's a different thing, where you listen to a type of music and then you'll get a recommendation about 5 or 6 other types of music that sound like it. It's a little bit different, but in the same way.
No, but it's kind of the same, because at that point you're losing your inner concept of diversity. And it's music is like a meal. You don't just eat beef at a meal. You have all of these different things that implement and round out a meal being a good meal. So you look at music the same way. You don't want everything on your plate to be the same. You want your plate to have some diversity. And that's what the music does. But it can't do that if you're saying everything you like is based on this one concept. That takes the global diversity appeal away from you, and it says that you are your own self compartmentalized.
Yeah, I have to figure out a way to continue to evolve as well. In the sense that I guess I look back and I want to get to you guys because I can see and hear, or hear and see, that you guys are really growing. And there was also, I'm curious to get your feedback on this. Guys like Dizzy and Miles, Ahmad Jamal, they had their own thing going on in the 70s, but there was sort of a new generation of jazz musicians like yourself who I think in some ways wanted to grow from bebop. That time period was open to change, and you guys took full advantage of it, where 5 years later, that was not the case.
Well, we had already evolved, and the music had evolved. That's like saying the bebop guys wanted to play Dixieland. They had evolved from that already. They had went through swing and then gone through bebop. So then came the cool, so it was ever evolving. But it seems like there were a lot of people that wanted to put a cap on how much it could evolve and where it could evolve to. While society was evolving. I mean, you take every jazz fan, we switched from vinyl to CD. Look how many people resisted that when it started. Now, vinyl is basically obsolete. A jazz fan has to be of a certain age to be one that really embraces vinyl.
The mic. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, go ahead.
The Michael Howell track I played was on vinyl, and I only own vinyl. I have sold every CD I own to collect vinyl.
And a lot of jazzers are like that. But do you also realize that a great jazz person deals with both?
Can you explain? Can you talk about that?
There are pros and cons of both. It's just as we utilize a microwave oven or the cell phone. Yes, it has its drawbacks, but it also has its assets. In some ways, it's much more convenient. It's much more compact. It makes it easier and more accessible for us to have a diverse playlist to travel with us. For example, you can put half of your jazz collection on an iPod and walk around with it wherever you go. You can't do that with vinyl. Yes, vinyl sounds great. Yes, it's integrated in a turntable and some great speakers and a great amp for an audiophile buff, but it's not portable, which means there's a sect or a group of people that don't have that same accessibility as you, the aficionado, has by having that vinyl collection. They have to physically be where that collection is to absorb it.
Yeah, I try to make sure, whether it's my classroom, in my day job as a teacher of the visually impaired, or whether it's in my living room here where I can dance with my daughter, I try to always make sure that, I have a vinyl player, an amp, and 2 speakers. In the car, I can do analog cassette or CD. I'll burn the records onto CD. But I think some of the nuggets of gold, and the liner notes and the pictures and the art, that's not transparent on an iPod. And for instance, and I wanted to, this is a good segue because I wanted to ask you I wanted you to talk about your relationships with George Duke and John Hurd, 2 really special guys and guys I've had a chance to interview, and I love those MPS sessions that you guys did with George, Faces in Reflection and Feel, among others. I know you did I heard she heard the blues. I heard her cry. Was that it?
I love the blues. She heard my cry.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. I love that title. But talk about those guys from the standpoint of working as a team.
Well, as a team, we had a goal in mind, and part of that goal involved freedom of expression, which is what jazz started off being and what jazz will end up being. Jazz musicians have to be free to speak their voice. So what we did was we were free in a trio setting starting off to start to pave the way for the new technology and the new spirit of how players were playing. And
that was the goal.
Team,
that was your goal.
That was our goal.
Yes.
As a team, we set out to play like we wanted to play with the material we wanted to play. It wasn't based on, well, this is a trio, so it has to be acoustic, or we have to deal with only the trio tradition. It was a group that was based on, man, let's try this, let's try that. And it all came from us trying different things.
Yeah,
that's how that team worked.
John Hurd said that George had enough plugins and outputs and inputs. He looked like an old telephone person controlling all those different, like an old call center type thing.
Yeah, but check out what happened as a result of that. And before I go to George Duke, let me go to Jimi Hendrix for a second.
Go ahead.
The sounds that Jimi Hendrix got out of the guitar, that he got out of the guitar, made for other companies to create technology so other guitarists could get those sounds. So in the case of a George Duke, a Chick Corea, a Herbie Hancock, companies started creating equipment that would make it easy for anybody to get those same sounds. Whereas the Herbies, the Chicks, the Georges, they had to use all of these added devices to the instruments to achieve those sounds. And these sounds were unheard of before they started playing these instruments the way they played them, with the hookups and plugins that they played them with. So they were creating, at that time, these guys were creating the essence of the next synthesizers way back then, and what a synthesizer needed to do. And it just kept growing. It kept growing. And it kept growing. But it was based on those guys going out there with the plugins and the devices and playing the way they did with what they were doing.
In some ways, though, you said that they were creating sounds that people could then emulate those sounds.
Yes.
Right? Now, the difference is that George, Herbie, and Chick, those guys, they were developing their own sound. And the difference there is that they were creating their own sound, whereas then people were modeling and saying, let's get people to sound like this, instead of the emphasis on being, how about what's your sound? What's the unique sound that you have? Why do you have to copy this?
Well, they didn't necessarily copy it. They used that as a springboard to create their sound.
As a template.
Yes. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to have all of these plugins to use that sound as a point of departure. It's no different from Miles Davis putting the mute in. Yeah, the mutes have been around, but they hadn't been used the way Miles used them. It's like a plunger. We didn't start using a plunger on the horns initially. It wasn't created for that. But after you heard great trumpet players and trombone players use the plunger, then everybody says, okay, now that's a new point of departure.
Right.
Let's do something with that.
Right. I dig that a lot. I dig that. What I mean, and it was interesting because in those sessions, it also seemed like you guys were definitely having a good time. I mean, there was the red wine was flowing, and people were having fun. It was very relaxed. So I'm not sure if it was clearly like it wasn't. It was love. That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, it was. And that's when the music becomes much more valid. When the premise of the creation is not based on, okay, we need to do what someone else has done already, or we need to do this to make some money. But we have something we want to say, and that's what we need to do. Let's say that. Now, you have something that's viable.
Ndugu, take me to the 21st century right now, where we're at in 2011. Point me in the direction of something that is a group, a band, because I don't like to focus on one person. Actually, I wanted to ask you about that. How many albums did you make that you never received royalties on?
Well, royalties for what?
Well, here's my point. What I'm discovering is with a lot of guys, during a certain period of time before, a lot of sidemen were oftentimes, if you were brought in as in a rhythm section to play with a certain leader, unless they were extremely selfless, more often than not, you got paid for the session itself. But you might never even see a copy of the album that you made so special, or you might not have received any royalties, like on the Black Jazz label, for instance.
Well, that was never the intent. Musicians, especially studio musicians, were paid very well to play, create, and make someone else look good. So it never was based on us receiving anything. The only time we did receive something was when we wrote something, which is the case for the music business anyway. If you don't write it, if you don't produce it, you don't get paid. If you just play the session, that's a certain fee. And as a session musician, we always got that fee. But as a royalty artist, you only got that fee as a royalty artist. Now, I will say for me, I have been rewarded greatly for most of my work because I was always not only the musician, but also the businessman. And I always made sure that I got paid. And when I say that, whatever was due me, I always made sure that I got it. If there was a royalty due me, I got it. If there was points or anything due me for any situation, I made sure I got it. There are only a couple of situations where the guy beat me, but he beat me because he had to bankrupt his company in order not to pay me.
You don't mess with yeah.
More often than not, I got paid.
It's great to have a bottom line, is it not?
Well, this is a business. Creativity is creativity, but the business of creativity is the business of creativity. So you got to always ensure that when you're creating, you're going to be rewarded for your creativity. I don't want to give it away. I've never been one of those musicians that wanted to go down in history as being a poor, broke, starving genius. I never wanted to look at it that way. I wanted to be paid for what I did. That's just common business. It's music, but it's business. So I always looked at it from that perspective. What's the business aspect of this? I can't say the industry did me an injustice. I don't think I got ripped off like a lot of other artists have been ripped off because I made enough noise to make sure that I got compensated.
Yeah,
You know? A lot of times people say, "Man, you crazy. You'll never get it. If you never ask, you never get it. If you don't know what you should be getting, you never get it." So I got it.
We're in our final moments here with Ndugu Chancler. It's been an enlightening hour for the host. Ndugu, I just wanted to tell you, I'm the MC of a tribute to Gene Russell, a concert happening in Lemire Park this Thursday, and I wanted you, if you could, I didn't know if you knew Gene. Did you know Gene?
Yeah, I work with Gene.
Could you talk? I mean,
Talk to my lady.
You were on talk with my lady.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I knew you were on some black jazz albums. I wasn't sure if you were on that one, but so you're the perfect person to talk to in the sense that this has spawned a lot because I talked to Calvin Keys and the Skipper and yourself, guys that were part of the black jazz label, and while I try to go after and interview guys that had a profound impact on me, I always appreciated the fact of what Gene was trying to do with that record company and the money that he was going to use it. He was going to use it on guys who had somehow been passed over by the media, the music business construct. So, if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with Gene and what he meant to music in the Southern California area and what he meant to you.
Gene first off was a visionary, but Gene was ahead of his time. Gene wanted to do what people are doing now. Gene, and when I say people are doing now, he was very entrepreneurial. He wanted to have an outlet where artists could be creative, and have ownership of their whole thing without going to the majors, so the music would not suffer as a result of that. And Gene wanted to create that vehicle. Timing-wise, it wasn't a time when not only business people but also the artists were receptive to that type of ownership and disciplinary attitude. So Gene tried very hard to sustain and maintain that whole business model, but it was during a time where everyone was still finding themselves and weren't ready to be a part of something like that.
Why weren't they ready?
Economically, it was a new thing. We had just come out of the freedom of the music. We hadn't caught up with the attitude and the freedom of the business yet. In jazz, we had caught up with that in R&B music because we had Berry Gordy, and then we had Dick Griffey and those guys starting Solar Records. But we hadn't had that attitude in jazz yet.
So it was really about having the backing of the major labels, like in the Gordy label, for instance. Jazz didn't have those kind of entrenched labels.
Right. There hadn't been that kind of attitude prior to that point. So it was ahead of its time. Great idea, super idea. You look at it now and you say, man, why didn't more guys jump on board that bandwagon? Because his thing was no different from some of the other record companies that were offering deals, didn't have a lot of front money or anything like that. But, people, that was new, and they weren't ready to accept that coming from another black man.
One final question for you, Ndugu. What do you want to keep? What do you keep striving for every day? What keeps you getting up in the morning? What makes your soul burn? And I'm talking not just musically. I'm saying just in your life in general. What keeps Ndugu Chancler ticking?
What keeps me going is the fact that there's always something new to explore every day. There's something new to learn, there's something new to express, and there's something new to experience every day. That's called life.
Thanks so much for joining me today, Ndugu. I couldn't have asked for a better guest. It was great.
Jake, thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right, thank you very much.